Hello and welcome to Handplates Recollections. After the first two installments of my Handplates stories, I had a bunch of little ideas for one-shots on how different events in the boy's future might play out. And here are the first three in the new series. But since writing takes a while, I thought I'd give them to you in smaller batches. Now before I introduce the first one, I need to thank Cat2444 on Tumblr for the amazing cover art for each of these stories. She banged these out so fast and they're so perfect, so please go show her some love. I'll link to her Tumblr in the description. Okay, so the first in the set is called How to Win at Hide and Seek. Well, Sans thought, this was embarrassing. Sans knew he couldn't keep this new power a secret forever, especially from Papyrus. But that wasn't going to stop him from keeping up the charade for as long as possible. He had just hoped it wouldn't come out like this. Sans went over his options as he looked down at the floor from the high buttress that supported the corridor ceiling, wrapping his arms and legs tightly around the beam as he laid on his stomach. Option 1, find a way to caper down without falling to his death. Option 2, start yelling and hope somebody with easy access to a ladder heard him before Papyrus did. Or option 3, try the new trick one last time. Option 1 was out of the question. Once the buttress met the wall, it was a sheer drop of at least 20 feet with no hand or footholds. 2 was plausible, but the likelihood of Papyrus hearing him first was very high, and Sans' fear hadn't overtaken his pride just yet. And 3, well, that was tricky. He could end up on the ground where he wanted, or he could end up somewhere much worse, like in the floor, or in a wall, or high up in the air without anything to grab onto. Sans sighed. Maybe he shouldn't have risked so much over a game of hide and seek. Still, this sucked. Just when he'd discovered a new power, something all his own, it had to go wrong. Papyrus was going to find out, and then worry about it enough to tell Dr. Alphys. And then she wouldn't have a clue and would just run to him to try to figure out what should be done about it. He squinted at the ground beneath him, trying to get a feel for his surroundings. If he could gain an understanding of how far the floor was, that would help immensely. He did better in places he was familiar with, where he could recall the dimensions of the room with his eyes shut. But the tile pattern beneath him was bright and confusing. White and black square tiles, laid out in a chessboard pattern below him, running the entire length of the corridor. Looking down at it from this height, it created a bizarre illusion that took away all appearance of depth. Having one functioning eye didn't help either. It was impossible for Sans to determine how far from the ground he was, and the longer he tried, the more his vertigo set in. At one point, the floor seemed to buck and ripple, and he shuddered, gripping the beam tighter. Geez, he muttered, feeling sweat trail down his skull. Maybe getting Papyrus's attention wouldn't be so bad. After a few more minutes, or perhaps hours, Papyrus entered the hall, scanning the room with serious diligence. Hey, bro? Sans called. Papyrus started and spun around, searching for the source of the noise. Up here, Papyrus. Papyrus looked up, then gasped and put a hand over his mouth. Sans gave a little half-hearted wave before quickly returning his grip to the beam.
Brother, how on earth did you get up there? Are you all right?
Sans winced at the sound of his brother's worry. It was even harder to bear than his anger.
Long story. Do you think you can help me down? Maybe get a ladder or something?
Of course. I'll be back in a moment with help. Just stay right where you are. Don't move an inch.
Sans chuckled dryly.
Don't worry, bro. I'll just be hanging out here.
But Papyrus didn't seem to hear him in his haste. Papyrus reappeared with 2 flying monsters wearing the royal crest. Sans remembered they were called Whimsalots. Once they had Sans back on the ground, Papyrus tearfully scooped him up into a tight embrace, both to comfort and support his shaking brother.
Sans, oh my god, I was so worried! How did you even get up there? How long were you up there? You could have died!
I know. It's a long story. Like I said, bro. Sans panted. God, he was so selfish. Why hadn't he thought of how this might affect Papyrus? I'll tell you in a bit, I promise. Let's just rest for a minute. I'm bone tired. In response to this, Papyrus hoisted his brother over his shoulder and swiftly marched down the corridor.
Nonsense! We must get you checked out by a doctor immediately! You're sweating and shaky, possibly suffering from shock.
I'm not in shock. It's just... Look, I want to explain to you what happened, but if you take me to a doctor, then I won't. Papyrus slowed his pace.
Brother...
Bro, please. I'll tell you everything. Just don't bring anyone else into it right now. Papyrus still didn't like it, but he conceded and returned to their rooms instead. So, it's like this, Sans began. It was the fourth such start he'd attempted so far, and still wasn't any closer to actually beginning. He shifted, retreating further into the mountain of blankets Papyrus had wrapped him in to try and stop his shivering.
Brother, just tell me. I can handle it,
Papyrus said. Yeah, I know you can. I'm sorry. Sans drew in a shaky breath, then let it out slowly. Not long after we got here, I discovered something. Something new I could do with my magic. Papyrus leaned in closer.
Something new? Like a new power?
Sans nodded, swallowing. God, this was hard. Why was it so hard to tell this to his own brother? Yeah. So, if I just think about a place I want to go, like across the room or something, and imagine I'm there, it triggers something and I can just appear there? I don't know, it's really hard to explain.
So, you can go somewhere else, but without walking?
Yeah, that's it. Like a shortcut. Papyrus crossed his arms.
It figures you would come up with a way to avoid walking around.
Sans let out a small laugh, despite himself. Papyrus peered at him sharply.
Wait, is this how you've been winning at hide-and-seek lately?
Guilty as charged. Sans shrugged. I can't go very far, though. Just from one side of a room to the other. I did go from one room to another room once, but I haven't done it again since. It felt like I got really close to getting stuck in the wall. But I'm getting better, he added, seeing the look of horror on Papyrus's face. I think it has something to do with math. It got a lot easier when I started reading about physics and stuff.
I see.
Papyrus studied his brother. Sans shrunk further into the blankets. He should have told Papyrus about this sooner. He knew that. And Papyrus knew that. And knew that Sans knew that. He sighed.
Brother, I'm glad you told me, but we really should tell Dr. Alphys about this.
Sans looked away. Fine. Just as long as she doesn't tell him about it. Dr. Alphys knocked on Gaster's office door. She knew he was busy with the core problems, but it had taken much convincing to get Sans to approve of her consulting Gaster. She wasn't going to delay it a moment, lest he change his mind. The door opened and Gaster stood in the doorway. He was wearing his white button-down shirt today, with the sleeves rolled up and no lab coat.
Oh, hello, Dr. Alphys. Is there something I can do for you?
His magic hand signed. Thank God, he was in a good mood today. Yes, actually, Dr. Gaster. I was wondering if you had some time to discuss something with me. she stammered. "As long as you have the time, that is." Gaster stepped back and ushered Alphys in.
Of course. Come in, please.
Alphys flipped through her notes as she searched for a place to begin. "Thank you, Dr. Gaster. I hope I'm not interrupting something?"
No. I could probably use a break from it anyway. I was calculating some tweaks for some of the machinery in the core. It isn't difficult so much as it is tedious.
As Alphys moved some papers off a chair to sit, Gaster walked to his coffee machine and poured a cup.
Coffee?
He offered. Alphys sat down and looked up to see what he was signing. "Oh, no thanks. I'm okay." Gaster shrugged and took a long pull from the mug, leaning back against his desk.
So what is it you wanted to discuss?
"Well, I was going through some of your writings on skeletons, and I wanted to know if there was anything else you knew about quantum physics and how they relate to certain aspects of skeleton magic. The chapter was a bit, sparse, and it's been a while since the latest edition came out, so I was wondering if any discoveries had been made since then?" Gaster considered her for a moment. Then his brow rose.
All right, which one of them is teleporting?
Neither. She shuffled her notes around some more. But I want to be prepared for any eventuality, so in case if something happens or one of them has questions, I have some place to start. Gaster's eye narrowed.
It would be much easier for me to give relevant advice if I knew which one.
Dr. Gaster, with all due respect, it's up to my discretion what information about them I give you. Alphys met his eye. If any at all. Gaster looked away first.
Right, of course.
He signed, running a hand over his skull.
It isn't my place to ask such questions. How much time do you have?
A few hours. I cleared an afternoon block for this.
Good.
Gaster walked to a corner of the room to retrieve a chalkboard mounted on an easel.
Grab some paper. This will be comprehensive.
Alphys shifted a blank piece of paper to the top of her stack and nodded. 2 hours, 4 cups of coffee, and several sticks of chalk later, Gaster put the finishing touches on the last equation while Alphys frantically scribbled on her notepaper.
That's about it. Make sense?
He signed, setting the chalk down and dusting off his hands. I've got it. It's a bit abstract, but it all comes back to support the same practical concepts. Gaster nodded.
Yes, exactly.
He straightened his glasses.
If Sans has any trouble understanding, his book should fill in the gaps.
Alphys glanced up to see what he was signing, then looked absently back down at her notes, touching the tip of her pen to her lips. No, this shouldn't be too much for him, I think. She froze. Slowly, her eyes moved back up to Gaster. He coughed, looking away.
Yes, well, let me know if anything changes. The ability can be a bit unpredictable as it's developing.
Dr. Gaster? He held up a hand.
I know, I'm sorry. I won't press the issue anymore.
Alphys's brow furrowed. Yes, I believe you've said enough. She gathered her notes and stormed toward the door. Thank you for your help, Dr. Gaster. I'll let you know if I need anything else. Gaster winced at her tone.
Alphys.
Oh, no, I understand completely, she said, turning to face him at the threshold. You're only concerned about them, as any father would be, right? All emotion drained from Gaster's face. His shoulders tensed. He stepped forward and gripped the door tightly.
Good day, Dr. Alphys.
He signed coldly. Alphys backed out into the hall, regret flickering over her features for a moment, before she gave a stiff nod. The door shut. Gaster walked back to the chalkboard, wiping it clean with the eraser a little harder than necessary. Alphys simply didn't understand. They couldn't be regarded as a unit. Each one had his own unique strengths and weaknesses, and methods of approaching problems. What made sense to one could be completely lost on the other, and vice versa. He had only wanted to make sure he gave her the right recommendations. Her outburst had been low and uncalled for, highly inappropriate. He slammed the eraser down and returned to his coffee maker. The pot was empty. He muttered a curse and began searching for his grounds and filters. He had only wanted to help. Maybe he was a little curious, but there was a practical reason behind it. There was no harm in it. Well, maybe there was some harm in tricking Alphys into divulging which one it was. Gaster had spent a long time rebuilding the trust between them since that day, and now he'd betrayed that trust in one moment of blind curiosity. He sighed, weakly pressing the button to start the brew. He had brought this on himself. He was being selfish. Watching the coffee drip into the pot, he thought of Sans, despite himself. It made sense the power would begin to manifest now. The skill was closely tied to one's abilities with advanced spatial reasoning. It was the reason Gaster hadn't taught them much math beyond the basics, even though Sans had shown great aptitude for it. God only knew what sort of trouble he might get himself into before he got the power under control. Gaster hoped Alphys's newfound tenacity would continue to grow. She would need it in order to set some hard and fast rules so the child didn't get himself stuck in a wall, or scattered across time and space. The coffee finished brewing and Gaster poured himself a fresh cup. His eye fell to the pen and notepaper on his desk. No, she was fine. It was nothing she couldn't figure out on her own. But Sans was so fragile. One mistake could be the end of him. Gaster blew on the steaming mug. No, now was not the time. Not after what just happened. It wasn't his place. But there was some key advice he could offer from his past experiences. Gaster hadn't mentioned any of that in his lecture, and he hadn't gone that in depth in his books. He reached for the pen. So the practical reason for this story was to explain how Sans discovers his teleporting powers in this AU. But I also used it as an excuse to show Gaster's reaction to the boys discovering powers that he's unable to observe and help them master, as well as showing off Alphys's confident new attitude. But I'm sure they got over it eventually. And by that I mean pretended it never happened and never spoke about it again. Such healthy coping mechanisms with this bunch. Anyway, so the next story I've got for you is called Lending a Helping Hand. Papyrus pulled a purple and red scarf out of an old chest.
Look, brother, these colors are even better.
I don't know. It's still a little long, I think. I'm fine with this one, Sans replied, fumbling with the pale blue scarf haphazardly wrapped around his neck.
All right. Well, I'll keep it over here just in case.
Papyrus set the scarf over the end of his brother's bed, then went back to digging in the chest. They were sorting through some winter clothes brought to them by King Asgore, who was standing in their doorway watching in amusement. He was going to take them on a tour outside of the castle, to a far part of the underground he called Snowdin. The king had told them it was cold there, even colder than Waterfall, and that they would have to wear heavier clothing. Unable to stop himself from chuckling any longer, Asgore approached Sans.
Here, let me help you with that,
he said, kneeling down to untangle the child. Sans' voice came out a bit muffled as the layers of yarn were pulled over his face.
Thanks, Your Majesty. Guess I got a bit wrapped up in the excitement.
Papyrus let out a groan from inside the chest, and Asgore just laughed all the more.
Honestly, brother, these puns of yours are getting out of hand. Wait, what are these?
Papyrus pulled a matching pair of small cloth lumps from the chest, staring at them incredulously.
Oh, those are gloves. Here, let me show you,
Asgore said. Papyrus handed the gloves to the king, and after looking at them, Asgore turned to Sans.
Hold out a hand, Sans, if you don't mind. These seem to be just your size.
Sans did so, and Asgore slipped the cloth over his hand. Each of Sans' fingers fit perfectly in the glove.
They keep your hands warm, and you can pull these strings at the end to tighten them, since your wrists are thinner than most monsters. See?
Yeah, pretty cool, Sans said, apprehensively tugging at the strings. He looked over at Papyrus. Bro? Asgore turned. Papyrus had found another pair and was already trying it on. He held out his right hand in front of him, each finger of the glove standing tall, except the pinky. Silently, he pulled the glove off and put it on again, arranging his 4 fingers in a different way. This time, the 4th finger flopped over. It's no biggie, bro. We'll find a pair that works for you, Sans said. Papyrus started. He quickly pulled the glove off and tossed it back in the chest.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'll just not wear any.
He smiled weakly.
I'm sure my hands will be just fine. With fewer fingers, they're bound to get less cold, right?
Sans' head tilted, but he said nothing, slipping his hands into his coat pockets. As Papyrus made himself busy folding the garments that had already been tried on, Asgore stepped around him and reached into the chest. After digging for a moment, he said,
I'll be back in a moment. You boys stay here.
The king lumbered out of the room. When the heavy footsteps padded out of earshot, Sans stepped close to Papyrus. You know, it's okay to feel bad about it.
Feel bad about what, brother?
Papyrus didn't look at him, dutifully folding and stacking clothes into tall piles as though he had been given a royal decree. Your hand, Sans said. It's okay to feel bad about your finger. His brother continued to look down, fussing over a sweater he'd already folded twice.
I don't know what you're talking about, Papyrus said shakily. I don't feel bad about it. There's nothing to worry about. I'm completely...
Just then, the sleeve he was attempting to fold slid from his grip. Papyrus's hand flew forward to catch it, but he overcorrected, knocking over a stack of clothes in the process. He froze, staring blankly at the mess. Sans sighed. He stepped in front of Papyrus, blocking his view from the clothes on the floor. Do you remember what you told me when my eye got broken? He asked. Papyrus didn't look at him. You told me that I wasn't any less even though it was broken. You said I was still me, and you were still my brother, and you'd always be there to glow for me. Sans took Papyrus by an arm and lit his left eye with a pale blue light, pulling Papyrus so close it reflected off both their faces. It illuminated the tears starting to gather in his brother's eye sockets. It's the same for you, bro, Sans whispered. You're no less for missing a finger, and I'll always be here to help you if it's given you trouble. A small noise came from Papyrus. He lunged forward and wrapped himself around Sans. Finally, he broke down. Heaving sobs racked his whole body, tearing from his chest in violent waves. Sans shushed him, rubbing his back, allowing his brother's tears to soak into his hood. After several minutes, Papyrus was able to work coherent words in with the sobs.
I try so hard, brother. I try not to let it bother me, and it usually doesn't. But sometimes I have trouble holding a pencil or carrying stuff, and the way some people stare.
He choked around another sob and gripped Sans even tighter.
I just want them to like me. I want to be friends. I just want...
Sans started, and it was his turn to grip his brother tighter. No, don't say that. You don't need to be like them. You're you. You're Papyrus. You're smart. You make awesome puzzles. You're good at cooking. You never give up. You always... Sans paused, feeling tears gathering in his eye sockets. He continued softly. You're better. You're great. You've always been more than enough for me. That should be good enough for them.
You mean it?
He asked around a hiccup. Yeah, so don't you ever forget it. 'Kay, bro? Papyrus sniffed, and Sans felt him nod.
My puzzles are pretty good, aren't they?
Sans' smile grew.
Yup.
You could try something new to shake it up, though, like a crossword. His brother broke the embrace immediately, giving Sans a stern look.
Crossword? Pah! Such simple puzzles are not even worth my time.
In a dramatic flare, he put a hand to his chin thoughtfully. Already his tears were gone.
In fact, I recently found a new kind of word puzzle in a magazine. It was called a jumble. Very intriguing, wouldn't you say, brother?
Sans chuckled, stuffing his hands back in his pockets. They were interrupted by a cough at the door. The king had returned.
Sorry if I'm interrupting something, but I think I may have found just the thing for you, Papyrus.
He approached the young skeleton and held out a couple of bright woolen lumps. Papyrus took them, looking from one to the other in confusion.
Oven mitts?
Asgore smiled.
Close, they're mittens. They're just like gloves, only they have just a thumb and one huge pocket for the rest of your fingers. Try them.
Sans watched Papyrus slowly hold one mitten out and carefully slip it over his left hand. He wiggled his fingers briefly, then slipped the other on. Holding both hands out in front of him, he wiggled all of his fingers together. Side by side, they looked and moved exactly the same. His eyelights began to sparkle.
Oh, Your Majesty, they're perfect! Thank you so much!
Papyrus turned to Sans, waving his hands out in front of him.
Brother, look! Look, you can't even tell which finger is missing!
Sans grinned and nodded. They look great, bro. See, I told you it was no problem. Papyrus groaned and threw one of the other discarded gloves at his brother in outrage. A little while later, they were at last ready to go to Snowdin. When they entered the corridor outside the boys' suite, Papyrus ran ahead to address each and every monster in their path, showing them his incredible red mittens. Asgore grinned, not willing to put a damper on the child's exuberance. Hey, Your Majesty, Sans said quietly, not taking his eyes off his brother. Asgore bent down to hear him better. Thanks. It means a lot. Asgore smiled and patted Sans' shoulder with a great paw. Together they walked down the hall, trying to catch up with Papyrus before he got too far out of sight. Someone in the comments of Released had asked if Papyrus really wasn't bothered by missing a finger, and the answer is mostly. He's not really prone to being melancholy and lingering on his problems, but because he's so in the moment, he can get a bit overtaken by something distressing if it takes him by surprise. And it doesn't help that because he was raised by a certain emotionally constipated skeleton, he's got a bit of a complex about pleasing people. But after some bracing words from Sans, he's all good to go again. And Asgore really came to the rescue here too. Though Sans still doesn't trust him, he just can't quite forgive him for being so lax on Gaster's punishment. And now for the last story in the set. Because this Gaster doesn't get erased from time, that means he'll be around when the events of Undertale begin. So this story is how a Pacifist run might turn out if this version of Gaster is still alive and kicking. And because I'm really good at naming things, this one is called True Pacifist. Gaster watches the human enter the far end of the corridor. They linger there for a moment, gazing around distantly, as though they think they've forgotten something. They haven't seen him yet, though he guesses they already know something's there by the way they pause. Then they continue through the bands of light and shadow as they cross the bright, golden hall. When they reach the center of the room and enter the light again, Gaster steps into the open, knowing the brightness would momentarily blind them. His simple ruse seems to work, because when the human reaches the next patch of shadow, they stop. They see him at last. They gasp and step back. Gaster idly wonders if this is truly the first time the human has seen him.
Let us begin.
He says, Bones manifest around him. They try to jump. They stand firm in the pool of light and put a hand in front of their eyes, squinting at the figure before them. His brow ticks up at their cool reaction. He suspects this is not the first time they've seen him.
Let us begin,
he says. Bones manifest around him. They try to jump. They look up at his face well before their eyes could have adjusted. Gaster's eye narrows at the human. He's not one for dramatic entrances, but their reaction serves as yet more proof in support of his theory. He wastes no time speaking before beginning his attack. They've heard it before anyway, and it's best to end this quickly. Something in the human's expression makes him pause. He's seen that look before, someone staring into the face of death and refusing to back down. They step toward Gaster first. He attacks immediately, refusing to let them get the upper hand. Even with the slight advantage, the battle is frustrating. He won't call it difficult. They aren't even attacking him, just running and dodging, as they've done since their journey through the underground began. It's as though they know where each attack is going to land and where to be just at the right moment, just as he predicted. No matter. It isn't too long before they begin to hesitate, unsure of where to go. A few bones nick them. The blasters catch them by surprise. The human stands in the light and stares him down, determination glittering from narrowed eyes, half hidden under a mop of brown hair. Gaster's hands shake. He wonders how many times he's seen this face before him now, how many times his experience has been deleted and rewritten without his knowledge or control. If the human's reactions are anything to go by, it's many times now. He can almost feel time warping around them, shifting and changing as the unnatural creature bends reality itself to their will. Abomination. He won't stand for its existence one moment longer. There is no way he will let this creature reach Asgore. His friend has suffered enough at the hands of the humans. The pause before the battle begins is getting longer. The human can almost act before the monster does now. Something is weighing on the skeleton scientist, and each reset makes it more pronounced. Gaster is hard to read, and never speaks in a way they can directly understand. But each time, he says something different, something new, adding information, posing riddles that tease the back of their mind. Even as he slows and begins to shake with exhaustion, they're getting close to a breaking point. Each new iteration makes them think of their friends, and the similar transformations they went through. Alphys and Undine, whose trust and friendship they'd earned through hard work and forgiveness. Papyrus and Sans, who guided and protected them through most of the underground, and had eventually trusted them with the secret of their past. The two had left the human on their own as they entered the core, saying something about preparing a victory party. But they can't help but feel like the two are still with them, even now. Gaster seems to be preparing his final attack. Here it comes. But what is...
Tap!
The human meets Gaster's gaze. Their soul blazes red in front of him, ready to battle, but he does not strike. They aren't backing down, but he sees the look of dread in their eyes. His fists clench. What do they know that he doesn't? His eye flashes yellow. He attacks. The battle drags on and on, bringing Gaster beyond the point of exhaustion. The human continues to avoid his attacks effortlessly, with precision he knows has been hard-won by the corruption of his timeline. The nerve of them. The absolute nerve. The humans trapped them down here, entombed them in a prison intended to last until the end of time, and now they wouldn't even allow time itself to free them from this miserable existence. Humans simply had to have control of everything. They couldn't be happy knowing they were simply more powerful than all monsters. They wouldn't be satisfied until every monster had been thrown before them, until they'd held the soul of every monster in their grasp and allowed it to live or die by their own hand, even if they had to break the laws of nature to do it. Well, two could play that game. Gaster's chest heaved, sweat dripped freely down his skull. Every part of him shook. His attacks were losing form, striking the ground and walls around the human without coming close to their intended target. His battered soul thrummed in his chest, and for the first time he could feel the cracks in it. The cracks he himself had put there, for the same reason he'd cut the holes in his hands. Everything he's sacrificed, all the pain he has caused, it will not be for nothing. He will not allow this human to proceed another step. Gaster holds his hand out in front of him, drawing on energy he knows he doesn't have. He wreathes the human in a circular wall of bones, stopping them in their tracks. Then he summons a single blaster pointed straight at them. The cracks in his soul grow wider. He has never used bone and blaster magic together before, and this is why. Their combined power is far too taxing on a damaged soul, but he doesn't care. This human will die here. No other monster will suffer by their hand, even if it means shattering himself in the process.
This ends now.
The blaster begins to charge. Gaster's vision is blurring. A streak of red fabric flashes in the corner of his sight. He can't look away now, can't stop the attack. He knows he doesn't have the strength to set this trap again.
Wait, Pap!
He blinks. Someone in blue is in front of the human now, facing right, arm outstretched. What? No! Gaster pulls at the magic, desperately forcing it back into his soul. The sharp influx of raw magic feels like it's burning him alive. But even as he struggles to dissipate the attack, he knows it won't be enough. The blaster fires, and Gaster throws up an arm to shield his eye from the light. The blaster's power is significantly reduced, but it's still more than strong enough to cause fatal damage. The attack only lasts a few seconds, but to Gaster it feels like an age. When the blaster finally depletes itself and vanishes, the room is left in a vacuum of light and sound. Gaster rubs at his one good eye, trying to clear the spots from his vision. Something is wrong. His soul is stable, but something is missing. He squints at the figures in the pool of golden light in front of him. The human is still huddled in the bone cage, which he dared not dissipate yet. A bent figure is crouched low in front of them. Their back is turned to Gaster, but he cannot mistake the red scarf wrapped around their neck. Papyrus. Where did he come from? Why was he here? The fool had said he was staying behind. He wasn't supposed to be here. He couldn't be here. Brother? The word cuts through the air like a knife. It's barely a whisper, yet seems to echo endlessly off the walls and windows. And then Gaster sees it. Papyrus isn't shielding the human. He is kneeling over a pile of dust, clutching a blue jacket with shaking hands. Sans isn't even sure why he's here. It's done. He's failed to protect them. He can't stop this. That psychopath is going to kill the human, and that'll be the end of it, again and again. Oh well, in the end, it was just one more broken promise. He has to admit, it is kind of funny to watch him fight. Sans can almost understand his frustration. He had almost felt the same way when the human had tipped their hand. He had almost felt something. Sans' eye sockets go dark. Wouldn't it be funny if he lost, though? All those times he railed against humans, and he couldn't even kill one that refused to fight back. But all those resets, The number is insane by this point. Could he best the human? Hold on. Is that...
Wait, Pap!
Gaster is on his hands and knees. He doesn't remember falling. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters. He didn't kill the human, and instead he's killed the only... Slowly his head rises. He has unconsciously dropped the bone cage, but the human remains by Papyrus's side. They seem to be trying to comfort him. What is that sound? It's like a saw being pulled over stone. Papyrus is crying, sobbing really, but that isn't it. This sound is nearer. Something drips onto the tiles below Gaster. It's him. How strange. How could he be crying when he's completely empty, when they've taken everything, when the humans have taken all he has again? It's unthinkable. How did he even have anything left to lose? Never enough. No matter how much he does, or how hard he tries, it is never enough. He's standing again. He's walking toward them. Papyrus is still sobbing. The dust coats his gloves. It's swirling in the air, the motes visible in the beams of light as it falls around them. The sight is sickeningly familiar. He's in range of them now. The human glances at Gaster an instant before he picks them up by their soul, holding them motionless in the air.
Reset,
He demands. His voice is toneless, and surely drowned out by Papyrus's wailing, but he knows the human will understand. They shake their head. "I can't," a small voice whispers. He slams them to the ground with a loud crack, dropping their remaining HP by half. He holds them up again, a bright smear of red now staining the floor below them.
I know what you can do. Reset.
They shake their head again.
Reset, or I will make you.
"I tried," they choke. Tears wipe clean tracks through the blood pouring down their face. "Can't change,"
Then perhaps you need to try a little harder.
Gaster replies coolly.
It's not as though you lack the opportunity to improve your strategy. It's all up to you how long this lasts.
Something tries to break Gaster's grip on the human soul, some other magic interfering with his own. He gasps, frustration and outrage shattering the spell of cold numbness which had seized him. His concentration wavers, and the human drifts gently downward. Their body comes to rest in Papyrus's arms. The young skeleton's breathing is short and erratic, but he holds the human carefully and firmly.
Papyrus, they're the only one who can fix this.
Papyrus clutches the human tighter, shaking his skull frantically. He's still on his knees, back turned toward him. Gaster raises a hand. A circle of bones manifests, pointing directly at Papyrus and the human.
I will hurt you if I must. You won't remember it anyway.
"But you will, won't you?" A chill rocks through Gaster's bones. It's as though his very marrow is turning to ice. It spreads through his limbs, crawls on his back. Gaster actually wonders if his own soul has turned blue for a moment. How could? When did? Why did?
There is no other way.
He growls. It makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense. He must have misheard. And even if he didn't, the words Papyrus just uttered simply have no bearing on the situation at hand. All he does is spout nonsense. He's so naive. He doesn't understand anything. Gaster will just attack them both, kill the human, and it will all go back to the way it is supposed to be.
It doesn't matter if you hurt me. I'm strong. I'll be okay. But you...
Papyrus's voice is hoarse and wet from crying.
You need to stop. I know you can. Just please stop hurting yourself. I can go on for us. But But please, please stop.
Papyrus breaks down into hysterics again. The human is still there, right there in his arms. One small hit and they'll be forced to reset. The attack would likely graze Papyrus as well, but he would be... Gaster's hand trembles. A simple gesture away from fixing this mess of a timeline. From killing... The bones flicker away one by one. Gaster's hand falls. He stops. Papyrus is right. He's always been right. Right about Gaster, right about his brother. Right about everything. From the very beginning, before he even knew the damn words to say it. And now, it's too late. There is no other way. It isn't fair. How can this be the true ending? It's all wrong. They didn't kill anyone. They did everything right. But no matter what they do, it doesn't change. They can go back to when they first met Sans and Papyrus and try to warn them, to make their two friends promise to let them face Asgore alone as they guide them to the core. But it doesn't make a difference. Nothing they do ever seems to make a difference. No phone call, no item, no attempt to reach out or change the pattern seems to be able to stop it. They can go forward from here, but they don't want to. Not without Sans. It isn't fair. Why can't he get out too? Why doesn't he get to see the sun? Why doesn't Papyrus get to keep his brother? Or Sans, in the iterations where Sans isn't fast enough to get Papyrus out of the way? Why doesn't Gaster ever show himself until now? And why won't he stop attacking until someone is dead? There has to be another path. There has to be. They'll find it. They'll reset as many times as it takes. They'll break something if they have to. They have not fought this hard for everything to end this way. They are determined. It was fascinating, watching the old bag of bones fight. Almost as interesting as watching the smiley trash bag when he got mad enough. They were both deadly and efficient, using attacks that provided only the tiniest openings for their opponents to exploit. That they gave them an opening at all was beyond Flowey's comprehension. If the ultimate goal was to kill the human, why even bother to give them that chance when they were done toying with them? Oh well, watching the game play out meant he got to see the trash bag get dusted, which was deeply satisfying even as it happened again and again and again. And every time the human reset, over and over and over. Clearly, they were looking for another way out, a happy ending where they got to save everyone. Flowey wasn't actually sure if there was another way out. It seemed like all the old bag of bones could do was hurt his children, even when he didn't intend to. If it wasn't one brother putting himself in the line of fire, then it was the other running up to save him in a rush of sweet, gullible idiocy. It was always the same. They would all come close, a fight would break out, and it would only end with tears and someone's dust on the floor. It was like putting together a puzzle that had too many pieces. No matter how you tried to fit them together, one simply had to go. The irony and stupidity of it was almost entertaining. The human had set out to not kill anyone, but that didn't mean that nobody had to die to achieve their happy little ending. But they would keep trying, oh yes. They were so determined to find a better way. The human would keep throwing their little temper tantrum all across time and space, until they tired of trying and finally gave up. Perhaps, Flowey mused, under other circumstances things could turn out better, or at least appear to, but not in this world. Not with these players and the weight of the history they shared. No, in this world, it was truly kill or be killed. And that is the end. I thought long and hard about this ending, but I just couldn't see Gaster stopping to show the human mercy unless something drastic like that happened. What I knew about his past at the time I wrote this was that during the war, he had shown mercy to humans in some way, which somehow or another led to the ultimate destruction of his kind. Knowing that, I just knew Gaster would not believe anything this human did or said. He'd made that mistake before, and he was not going to make it again. Faced with the same choice, he completely hardened his heart and barreled forward into more destruction. Now once again, I need to thank my friend Batsmaru for providing the voices of Asgore and Gaster. I'd also like to thank Zarla for creating this awesome story and being so open about letting people speculate and write fan stories. I think that kind of creative attitude is at least part of why I've stuck with this fandom for so long, and haven't managed to drag myself out of this trash can yet. So I'll see you all next time. I love you and take care.